We just heard the Christmas account from the Gospel of Luke, and that's where the birth of Jesus is announced to the shepherds. There is a Christmas account in the Gospel of Matthew. It involves the Magi. But in Matthew's account, the birth of Jesus is not announced to the Magi. Remember, they see the star in the sky and they interpret that as a king being born. But in the Luke account, shepherds are out in the fields at night. Suddenly an angel appears. It says what the text calls the glory of the Lord shined around them and they were afraid. And the angel tells them not to be afraid. The angel tells them about the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. And then there's a whole multitude of angels there praising God. And then all of them are gone, and the shepherds decide, well, let's go find the baby. And they did. They went and found the baby Jesus lying in a manger. And then it says that they go out and tell lots of people what had happened, and that people marvel about it. Now, one of the interesting things to me about this is the shepherds are the only people the Bible records the birth of Jesus being announced to. So as far as we know, that's the only group of people the birth of Jesus was announced to. Well, why was that? Why was it announced to just one group of people? Looks like it would have been announced all over the place, wouldn't you think? But it was just announced to one group of people. What purpose did that serve? And why was it announced to a group of shepherds? What's the significance of that? Now, over the years, there have been a number of explanations offered up as to why the birth of Jesus was announced to shepherds. And some say it harkens back to the Old Testament, where we see a lot of major Old Testament figures like Abraham, Moses, and David were all at one time shepherds. And so some people say that announcing the birth of Jesus to a group of shepherds is a connection back to the major Old Testament figures. Yet other people say that it prefigures Jesus referring to himself as the Good Shepherd. But one of the more popular ideas today is to say that shepherds were at the bottom rung of society, and announcing the birth of Jesus just to them was sort of a slap in the face to people of higher status. And some say that it means that God favors the outcast of society. However you want to define outcast, I guess. That's pretty popular now. If you read some kind of devotional thing about Christmas, you might read that it was announced to a group of shepherds who were outcast of society. They were on the bottom rung of society, and this and the other. But were they really outcast of society? You know, as with so many things about Christianity, these things get written down, and they get picked up, and they get started, and then we get some kind of little book or something, or hear on the radio or something. Somebody said, well, the shepherds were outcast of society, so we believe it. They don't give us a reason or any proof from history. They just say that, and it gets picked up and started. So where does the idea come from that shepherds were outcast of society? We don't really know. The origin of that is whatever you want it to be, I guess. However, there is a Jewish writing that comes from several hundred years after the time of Jesus that does not like shepherds. It is called the Jewish Talmud. That's just a collection of Jewish writings 200 to 500 years after the time of Jesus. And there's a little place in there where it talks bad about shepherds. But the reason it does is because shepherds apparently, wherever this person was writing, were letting their sheep graze on their land. And so shepherds apparently had a reputation of trespassing and letting their sheep graze where they shouldn't be, in effect stealing other people's pastures. And so then the Jewish Talmud has a phrase or a little thing against shepherds because of that. But that was several hundred years after the time of Jesus. So I don't think that's enough to conclude that at the time of Jesus, shepherds were seen as outcasts of society. It's possible they were, we just do not know from the historical record. I personally don't put much stock in the argument that the birth of Jesus was announced to shepherds because they were at the low rung of society. I personally don't put much stock in the idea that the birth of Jesus was announced to just shepherds as sort of a slap in the face to other people. It may be true, I don't know. I just never have thought it held water. What stands out to me about that idea, though, is that if you read the rest of the Bible, there's nothing anywhere in the rest of the Bible that indicates that shepherds were at the lowest rung of society. It's just not in there. We can go to the Bible and see how shepherds are talked about. And as we've already seen, the major figures of the Old Testament, who are Abraham, Moses, and David, were at one time shepherds. Talk about shepherds in the Bible starts early with Cain and Abel. And remember, Cain was the guy who was the tiller of the ground. He was a farmer. Abel was a shepherd. And they came up one day to bring their gifts to God. Abel brought the firstborns of his flock and the best ones. He brought, in other words, the best he had. Cain, though, brought the first of his, and God did not accept that. Why didn't God accept Cain's? We don't know. Whatever the reason was. But whatever the reason was, Cain got mad about it. And remember, he killed his brother Abel. He killed his brother Abel. So those are the first mentions of shepherds in the Bible. And as we talked about, the major figures of the Old Testament were shepherds. Obviously, they could not be considered outcasts of society. I mean, if Moses, Abraham, and David are the major Old Testament characters, they're certainly not outcasts. We go to look at other passages in the Bible. We find one from the book of Jeremiah, and God is talking to Jeremiah about the king of Babylon. And he says, "Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the floodplain of the Jordan against the dwelling place of the strong. I will make them suddenly run away. Who is a chosen man that I may appoint? Who is like me? Who is that shepherd for me?" And here we have an image of a shepherd who fights against lions. Instead of a shepherd as being at the lowest rung of society, here we see a shepherd as someone that God is pressing into service, a brave and mighty person, brave and mighty men who defend against lions. In the book of Ezekiel, God is speaking to Ezekiel, and he says, "David, my servant, shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd." And that's an interesting passage because that is written in a style called a parallel construction in Greek. And biblical scholars tell us that when you have a parallel construction, it is used to connect two things and accentuate a single meaning, which would mean that shepherd is connected with king. So if you're connecting shepherd with king, obviously a shepherd's not on the low rung of society because the king's at the top. The king of the Hebrews was often referred to as their shepherd. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, God speaks of David the king as the one he has instructed to shepherd the people. So the kings in the Hebrew society were seen as shepherds of the people. They are also seen as leaders of the people. In Jeremiah, God says, "I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding." in a completely different vein, in what's called the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, the lover is compared to as a shepherd. This is usually lost, but in chapter 2 it says, "My beloved is mine and I am his, he feeds among the lilies." The meaning is usually lost in translation, but it is literally this: "My beloved is mine and I am his. He is a shepherd among the flowers." And so saying that he is a shepherd among the flowers is certainly not saying that he is the low point of society. Another shepherd image is found, of course, in the account of David slaying Goliath. Goliath was the huge Philistine, threatening and challenging everyone, nobody could defeat, and a little shepherd comes up and kills Goliath with a stone from a slingshot, and so the shepherd saved the day. In the Old Testament, shepherds are sometimes seen as people who are instruments of God. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 44, God is talking about Cyrus. Cyrus was the king of Persia. He was the one who defeated the Babylonians and allowed Judeans to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. God said this about Cyrus: "He is my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure." In other words, Cyrus is the one God will work through. Cyrus will be an instrument of God's will. He will be the instrument God uses to get the Judeans back to the land of Judah. And most importantly of all, in the Old Testament, a number of times God himself is imaged as the shepherd. Remember, the Lord is my shepherd. And so from the Old Testament, far from getting an image of shepherds as outcasts on the low rung of society, we get an image of shepherds that couldn't be any better. They're identified with the major Old Testament figures. They're identified even with God himself. So how in the world can you take something like that and say that they're identified with the low rung of society without that? The fact is that the Old Testament sees shepherds as brave, strong, capable, regal, like royalty. And if you move it on into the New Testament, you see the same thing. Remember Jesus' parable of the lost sheep? At the end of the day, a sheep is missing. Well, does the shepherd lay down and get drunk and let it stay missing? No. He goes out and finds the sheep, gently picks it up, and carries it back on his shoulder. In other words, far from being the dregs of society, the shepherd is the hero who saves the sheep. And just as God is imaged as shepherd in the Old Testament, so is Jesus imaged as shepherd in the New Testament. He refers to himself as the good shepherd. In John chapter 10, Jesus said, "The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." The book of 1 Peter refers to Jesus as the shepherd of our souls. And so, far from having a negative view of shepherds, the Bible has the most positive possible image of shepherd. Some Jews will translate "the Lord is my shepherd" from Psalm 23 as "the Lord is my hero." Some Jews say that that was the traditional way of saying it. And so some Jews will say, instead of "the Lord is my shepherd," "the Lord is my hero." So how can you say the hero is at the lowest rung of society? See how when you read stuff in some of this Christian literature floating around, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You see, we have these images from the Bible itself of shepherds as courageous, strong, powerful, even romantic, royalty, instruments of God's will. We have God imaged as a shepherd in the Old Testament and the New. In fact, I think it's safe to say there's no other group of people in the Bible thought higher of than shepherds when you think about it. None. If any group of people comes across at the top in the Bible, it's got to be shepherds. I can't think of a group of people in the Bible that gets any more respect than shepherds get. So now we go back to the fact that the birth of Jesus was announced only to a group of shepherds. And from what we've seen today, if we go back to see how the Bible images shepherds, we see the birth of Jesus being announced to a group of courageous, strong, powerful men, men who are instruments of God's will. So why was the birth of Jesus announced just to a group of shepherds? What does it mean? What does it stand for? What does it symbolize? I have a lot of irritations with stuff in religion, and one of the irritations I have that really grates on me is that people sometimes go to great lengths to find out what something in the Bible symbolizes. And of course, everybody's got their own opinion. How did you know? I never try to look and see what something in the Bible symbolizes, and here's why. There may, in fact, be symbolic meaning to some things in the Bible. I don't know. But what I do know is that if there is, how would you ever know that? Think about that for a minute. You've got stuff that was written 2,000, 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and those people weren't here to ask, and they didn't tell us. And so if there is symbolic meaning to some of this stuff, how would you know what it's supposed to be? You might have an opinion about it. There's a lot of different opinions about it. But you'd have no way of knowing which one was right. Maybe none of them are. Maybe one that nobody's ever thought of is right. There's no way we could ever know. And for that reason, I usually don't pay much attention to all these opinions that get floated around out there about the different symbolic things of things in the Bible. You just can't know if there are or not. And so the way I look at it is, what if we just don't make guesses as to what the symbolic meaning might be? What if we just note how it's presented and let it go at that? In the case of the shepherds, we could note, and it is very interesting, that the birth of Jesus is announced only to a group of shepherds. And we could go to the Bible and see how shepherds are talked about in the Bible, and we could maybe come up with our own idea about it. But we'd never come up with the symbolic meaning. But if we did, we'd never know if it was right or not. So, just let it go. I always like to take Christmas for what it is. Take the accounts of Jesus' birth for what they are. They are presented to us as accounts of what happened. They are not presented as explanations. They are presented as accounts of what happened. And when you read what happened, when you try to think back on it, it's full of mystery and wonder. These things that the Bible reports about Christmas are things that we'll never understand. Things that we'll never find out the symbolism for or whatever. They are things that have never happened before and things that have not happened since. And so we just let it be what it is. Let it be what it is. I said this last week, and I really believe that Christmas is mystery. Christmas is wonder. We don't know really exactly how it happened. We don't know. There's a sense of wonder. Imagine yourself, you had no idea anything was going to happen. You were a shepherd. You were outside one night, minding your own business, going about whatever you was going to do, and here this happened. Just think of that. What would you have thought? Who knows what you would have thought? It was scared me to death. I mean, you know, you just wouldn't know what I thought that. This year at Christmas, I encourage you to don't ruin it by trying to put it all into a neat little box. Let Christmas be full of mystery and wonder. And just stand in awe of what happened and let it go at